Okay.
Louder.
All right. Back 50 years ago, this was a big parking lot. It was pretty ugly, and it was flat. So if you were here, what you saw and heard was the hub with all the traffic. And we had a man here who was an architect, Dan Goltz. Anybody remember him?
Yes.
Yes. His office was directly across the street, and he had to look at this for every morning when he went to work. So, you know, this was where you're sitting right now. Years ago, there had been a power plant here to provide power for the trains that ran through here.
So it's loud right
There
there.
had been, the tracks were part of what is now Drake.
All right.
And when all that was torn up in 41, it was just allowed to go to dirt and was actually pretty nasty. Now, Dan Goltz looked at this every day and decided, and the town decided, it was time to change things. And this was Dan's design. And what I'd like to talk about is what's different about it. It was built so you would not see the parking, which is genius, right? And so you have a knoll here, you have trees, and not only does it block you from the parking, it blocks you from the sounds of the hub and the distractions of what's going on outside. So this was a genius plan, I believe, and Dan Goltz knew what it was going to be like as time went on. This is the 50th, and we're really, I think, very lucky to have this event space and to have a park right in the middle of town that people can enjoy. What I'd like to do now is actually introduce you to Martin Blinder, who he can tell you more about it. He was a mayor, he was on the town council, and he was very much involved in making this happen. So let's hear it from Martin Blinder, please.
All right. Careful of all these cables there, Martin. You got it.
Right. Look, I'd like to play a tune first. Hi. Well, welcome. It's been a long time since we've heard any Mozart in this park. It was a very refreshing change. If we were standing here in 1924, we'd be probably waiting for our train to take us from downtown San Anselmo to the ferry building. And in 1924, using the train and the Marin County ferry, you could do it in 43 minutes. Of course, you would die. You can still do it today in 43 minutes if you drive at 4 in the morning and you don't run into any cops or any construction, and it'll cost you more than a dime. If we were standing here in 1944, you'd be watching the demolition of the great Marin County subway system or train system, pulling up the tracks to create Center Boulevard, pulling up the tracks and creating Sir Francis Drake as a 6-lane highway for about 3 blocks. And what was left was this dusty half-acre of parking. People now pulled their cars in, got the bus in the morning, and come back in the evening and pick up their cars in what was, I think, a 96-car parking lot. Now, that was bad enough. I think in 1954, the train station burned down, so there was even more space for parking. And this is a pretty dusty corner. You'd come back in the evening and your car would be covered with dust unless you parked in the wintertime, and then this was a mud flat. So the city fathers at that time got the idea, we have to turn this into a real parking lot. We're gonna put in asphalt, and we'll have stripes and maybe a few parking meters, and we would now have this 96 parking lot, which would be the centerpiece of San Anselmo, what we would be known for, the largest parking lot in Marin County. The city councilman at that time were elected again and again and again. They never even bothered to campaign. They'd been running the town for decades. And they had the civic imagination of an artichoke. Their idea of running a town was keep taxes low, keep services minimal. And they had the idea to turn this into a real parking lot by putting $5,000 in trust every year until they finally had enough money to really asphalt the whole place. None of this deficit financing. They were going to put the money away. So imagine by about 1972, 75, they had enough to turn this into one pavement. But that's not the only problem we had. The other problem was this wonderful natural asset that runs through the heart of San Anselmo, our creek. And here, if it was thought about at all, it was a surreptitious dump. People just dumped tires and refrigerators into this thing. I remember seeing what we used to call as a kid Coney Island silverfish. The condoms were floating down this creek. No self-respecting fish would ever stick a toe in this creek. Now, if San Anselmo and this creek were in Europe, they would be sidewalk cafes. Instead of this wall of buildings without any windows that face San Anselmo Avenue and look at the creek, there would be balconies, and it would be a heart of our entertainment and our commerce. Here in San Anselmo, the creek, as I say, just didn't exist. So that's where we were in 1972. This was about to be cement. The creek would be further cemented, out of sight, out of mind. And the 5 councilmen who had run this town for 30 or 40 years thought this was a really great idea, unanimously. But then, I think it was in 72, something happened. 2 environmentalists, even before I think the term was known, got elected and replaced 2 of the incumbents, Jim Stewart and myself. As I recall, I won by a landslide. I had 4 votes more than the incumbent that I displaced. It was enough. So now we had a 2-to-3 division. 2 of us wanted to create a park, and 3 continued with the idea we need parking spaces. Fortunately, the incumbents were getting on in years. These meetings ran late, these council meetings, and by 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, they get kind of drowsy and sort of doze off. It was past their bedtime. So Jim and I would always save our controversial measures for the end of the day. And when we saw them sort of drooping, I would say, or Jim would say, I make a motion, and the other one would say, I second it. We have a vote. Those against, well, maybe 1 nay, and the other 2 guys were asleep, so we passed 2 ayes, 1 nay, and 2 abstentions. And that is how we got the money out of this trust fund for a parking lot, and instead diverted it into creating a park. Now, this is politics, and in politics, there's always a need for compromise. And one of the things to get that 3rd vote, seriously, we had to agree to a small number of parking spaces. But as you heard a few minutes ago, Dan Goltz, then the architect, had the brilliant idea of depressing the place where the cars were so you really can't see them when you come into town. All you see is the trees and the foliage. And Dan also opened up the creek so you could have access to it. And this whole design was Dan Goltz's creature. But we had one small problem. After the whole architecture of the park had been created, we had run out of money. It wasn't Dan's fault. It took so long between the creation or the idea and the execution to build the park that costs had risen, labor and parts, so that we had the bones, if you will, of the park, but no money for the trees and the foliage. Fortunately, at that particular moment, surreptitiously, the Stark Nursery Company, big nursery company with trees and fruit trees and bushes and so on, they had a contest. 25 words or less, why I love trees. That was an essay. 25 words, why I love trees. So I entered the contest on behalf of the city of San Anselmo, and we won first prize. 2 weeks later, these enormous long trucks come in with every kind of tree that Dan could possibly want. That's where all these things came from. They were a little smaller when they came in. So even with our cost overruns, and when we ran out of money, Dan was not known for his willingness to cut corners. I remember him shouting at me, "I'm not going to put in pine when we need redwoods." You know? So, but he stuck to his guns, and this is what we have today. He exploited this natural amphitheater, and we started having band concerts. It really changed the very heart, I think, of San Anselmo. So we all here to celebrate Dan's genius and our good fortune and this wonderful creek, which we now can all enjoy. Thank you for coming.
Maybe you should run again, Martin. Okay, Dave's here.
So thank you, Martin. Dan's legacy is this park. He's long gone now. And his son, Dave, was going to show up tonight. Is Dave here?
Yes, he is.
Could you come down? But this is a tremendous legacy for the town, and it's something that we all really appreciate, I think. And
you have your smile like your dad.
so Dave's got a few words to talk about his dad, I think. Come on in.
Thank you. Well, what can I say after Martin Linder just said pretty much everything about the history of this great park. And my name is Dave Goltz, and Dan Goltz, the architect who designed the park, was my father. What I'm going to say is just going to take about 5 minutes of your time or so. I'm going to introduce myself, talk a little bit about my dad, and then hopefully some interesting anecdotes about the park as far as the history and the politics of how it was built. Well, I was 7, so not much. So my name is Dave Goltz, and I am not a true native. I was born in San Francisco, but grew up in San Anselmo. I went to Drake when it was called Drake, and Archie, for which the school is now named, was one of my teachers. I am currently living in Kentfield. I'm the chief of orthopedics at Marine Health Medical Center. I'm a doctor now. I decided not to become an architect. As far as my parents, they were from the Midwest, and they moved to San Francisco in the 50s when my father was drafted. There was no war on at the time, but he was drafted nonetheless and stationed at the Presidio. My mom was an English teacher. When my sister was born, they moved to San Anselmo, and my dad set up shop right across the bridge here in his office, which he held on to for many decades. And my mother was an English teacher at Santa Fe High. He was an architect and involved heavily in town, now city, and county politics. He did have a vision for San Anselmo as a community that had a heart, and more than just a place people lived, but a place that people called their home. Various crew of hippies, cowboys, and bikers got pretty rowdy, and the San Anselmo PD would just sort of sweep them down the street at the end. So things have definitely become a little more gentle around here. I can remember around the dining room table, my parents talking about a park where the community could gather and have picnics. Little kids could fish in the creek, and music could be played, as it is now. And that is indeed what happened. And it came to fruition in 1974. And I don't recall that there was much controversy. Again, I was just a little kid at the time. But I do remember right after the park was built, this liquid amber tree right over here at the end of the bridge, which is gigantic now, was just this little skinny thing. And the big controversy was that the teenagers on skateboards would shoot across the bridge, grab the tree trunk with their hands, and whip around and shoot back. Now the town was up in arms that this would ruin their beautiful tree. So they put a little fence around it. And now this is what we have. This big leaf maple tree was not here. That's a native, I believe. And what was there before was a weeping willow. And I can recall my father saying a weeping willow near a river is just a beautiful, iconic tree. So originally there was a weeping willow there, and I think it must have aged out. It's obviously no longer here. Last memory I can leave you with about the park is in the 1980s when I was in high school, and that's back when Drake, now Archie, used to win basketball state championships. 3 of them. Standing on this bridge as the raging waters of the flood came through. And as I was standing on the bridge and the water reached the edge of it, my buddy and I looked at each other and said, I wonder if this is smart to be here. And just about then we heard a big crack and the bridge shifted a few feet down. Oh, no. And we left. So that was a pivotal moment in the history of San Anselmo. I'm sure everyone who wasn't there has seen the pictures of floodwaters 5 feet tall running through downtown San Anselmo, Ludwig's store, you know. So that's another memory I have of the town of San Anselmo and the park back in the 70s, or I guess 80s then. Subsequently rebuilt, and we have this beautiful, strong structure now. The park lives on. So that's what I got for you. It's so nice to speak to you. Thank you very much, Guy, Martin, everybody. Bonnie. Thank you so much.
Wow.
So, Guy, do you have something else planned? Or no?
We're gonna have another set of music.
Okay.
We have more music.
So thank you, everybody. For those of you that remember this place before, this is just a very special day, being 50 years at a park that never seems to get terribly old and is still very lively. Definitely been lively with the streets closed down. We have a lot of young families now here living in San Anselmo, and so it's nice to bring life back to this park. And this is the legacy of Dave's dad, and so it's nice to actually remember him. I remember him actually because I was building my house at the time, and he was really a tough guy on the planning commission, but I managed to build it anyway. So thank you all. Enjoy the music when it comes back. Thank you.
Thank you.